Hello and welcome to the NFL Blitz, the defense analysis podcast. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Josh Shepardson at BChad50. Of course, first round, wild card rounds coming up here this week, and not a whole lot of offenses that we all feel great about, although everyone seems to be on the Steelers, and rightfully so because they're a dangerous offense, but a lot of mediocre to average, I guess, offenses. And the first one, obviously, Seattle Seahawks playing as well as any team in the NFL, save for the Rams game, of course, which you kind of moved that out of your memory. But coming off of just a massacre of the Arizona Cardinals, and obviously the Minnesota Vikings are nowhere near the offense that the Arizona Cardinals are. And Seattle, of course, in this one playing on the road. But the reward for the Vikings beating the Packers winning the division is you get the hottest team in football to come in and likely stomp out your offense.
Yeah, I mean, we saw this play out a few weeks ago. It was week 13 they played the Vikings in Minnesota, and the final margin was 38-7 Seahawks. That's still pretty fresh in the minds of gamers, I would imagine. Seahawks, biggest betting favorites this week, 5.5 points. And that actually feels a little light to me. I would have expected it to be just over a touchdown, but I mean, not bad, makes sense. The Vikings have played better since that beatdown that they took from the Seahawks that week. But as you said, not a lot of big offenses, but the Seahawks do have one of the better offenses in the wild card round. And if you got a good offense that can race you out to a big lead, suddenly your defense is in positions to pick up sacks, to force turnovers in predictable passing situations. And that's a big part of the reason why this is your chalk defense play for the week. They are the biggest favorites. They do have an offense that can stake them to a big lead, and they do have the defensive playmakers to take advantage of predictable situations, whether it's predictable passing situations with Teddy Bridgewater trying to play catch-up or stuffing the box to take Adrian Peterson away. At the end of the season, the Seahawks had passed the New York Jets as the best run defense in football in terms of yards allowed per game. 81.5 yards allowed rushing per game. We know where the Vikings offense runs. It runs through Adrian Peterson, and if you can't run the ball against the Seahawks defense, which basically no one has been able to do this year, you're not going to have a heck of a lot of success. So I do think Bridgewater's a little bit better than maybe his numbers indicate. They just haven't had to use him as much, but not against the Seahawks secondary, not against the Seahawks defense that can take away his best pass receiving options, the Stephon Diggses, the Mike Wallaces, and Kyle Rudolphs. I mean, this isn't exactly a murderer's row of receivers here. So really like the Seahawks defense this week, but so is everybody else. I figure they're going to be rostered on more than half of the cash game lineups at probably FanDuel and DraftKings. Not a ton of salary separation between them and some of the other top defenses. So in terms of budgeting for a top defense, you're going to pay up for the Seahawks. GPPs, still going to be high ownership, I think, just because you got to spend your money somewhere. With only 8 teams playing, there's a limited number of superstars that you can squeeze onto these rosters. So, again, I don't think that paying down for defenses, which tends to be pretty popular in GPPs, you just don't have that many defenses to pay down to because there are elite defenses playing this round.
Yeah, and I mean, daring Teddy Bridgewater to throw seems like a great scenario for a defense that got a chip on their shoulder. We saw them struggle early in the year, and they've just been, like you said, great recently. So you shut down Carson Palmer the way you did. Good luck, Teddy Bridgewater.
Exactly.
Washington Redskins next up, and it's crazy to think that this is what we've come to with Redskins and Packers in the playoffs, and we're talking about the Redskins, but it's a viable play. I mean, this Packers offense has been, I feel like terrible would be a compliment the way they played in the second half. I mean, they almost lost to the Lions. They only scored 13 points against the Redskins, scored 8 against Arizona. I mean, this is an offense that just cannot move the ball. Aaron Rodgers hasn't looked himself, and I mean, we were talking the other day about how Jordy Nelson may be the most valuable player for this team, and he hasn't even played because without him, I mean, this team has just looked lost.
Yeah, the receivers aren't creating separation. Randall Cobb looks like a shell of himself, being forced into really being the feature guy, which now I wouldn't even call him the feature guy. I'd say James Jones is that number one there, and Cobb is kind of the secondary option, and he's just not thriving without Jordy Nelson popping the top off of defenses. So they've lacked playmakers in the passing game. Eddie Lacy's looked lost at times. James Starks is putting the ball on the ground at times. And they scored 21 combined points the last 2 weeks of the season. Not only did they not score, they couldn't keep Aaron Rodgers upright. 14 sacks allowed the last 2 weeks of the season. I mean, granted, a lot of those came in that lost to the Cardinals, 9 of them, I believe. But they also allowed 5 sacks the season finale against the Vikings. So 14 sacks in 2 weeks is just dreadful. Giving up sacks has been a problem all year for them. They've allowed 47, which was the 5th highest total in the league. They've also turned the ball over a lot lately, 4 turnovers the last 2 weeks. So the Redskins, really an average to maybe even slightly below average defense, but with the way the Packers are playing, they don't have the receivers to take advantage of the soft spots in the secondary, and the Redskins can get after the quarterback a little bit. They did a pretty decent job of forcing turnovers. They do give up some serious yards per play, so it is definitely more of a bend but don't break defense, but they played better down the stretch. I mean, since their bye week, they've done a good job of forcing some turnovers. They've only allowed 2 teams since that Week 8 bye to eclipse 25 points, and that's the Patriots and Panthers. And they're 2 of the better offenses in the league, at least the Patriots when healthy, which they were fairly healthy against the Redskins. And the Panthers were one of the highest scoring offenses in the league. So certainly no shame in that, but against average to below average defenses or offenses, the Redskins played fairly well. So at their price, especially on DraftKings, actually on DraftKings and FanDuel, where they give you nice salary relief from the Chiefs and the Seahawks and the Texans, that's money that you can pump into your wide receivers this week, or your quarterback this week, which those are the 2 positions where really people are going to be paying up.
Yeah, and it's crazy to think that the Packers really are an average or below average offense at this stage. So,
yeah.
It's a viable strategy. It's just it doesn't feel right, but
right?
I mean, it makes sense though. Next up, obviously this game with a really low total, Chiefs and Texans. Neither offense a particularly scaring one. Chiefs are a nice balanced offense, of course, but Houston. My love for Brian Hoyer aside, this is not a great offense. It's Brian Hoyer and DeAndre Hopkins, and it's bad running backs who have had some success recently. Albert Blue is not a good running back. I'm not buying into what he's done in a few of the past 3 games. The game last week was out of hand. Jackson was a horrible defense. Also didn't care. And that game was it was ugly. I mean, I could have run for 80 yards. Okay, maybe I couldn't have. Someone my size who's in better shape could have run for 100 yards in that game. But either way, this Chiefs defense, they won 10 games in a row. They've played very well against all opponents, really, during that span. And you got to imagine that this game, no one would be surprised to see this game be a 16-13 type of game. And in all reality, it probably will be that type of game.
Yeah, I mean, the odds maker certainly wouldn't be surprised. Just a 40-point over-under total for the game overall. Chiefs would be happy for it to turn into a defensive slugfest. You mentioned their 10-game winning streak. During that, they've only allowed 2 opponents to score 20 or more points, so they're not allowing any scoring. They've also forced at least 1 turnover in every single win during that 10-game win streak, and multiple turnovers forced in 7 of those games. They've been one of the more opportunistic defenses in the league in terms of scoring. They've scored 6 touchdowns this year on defensive returns, whether they're interceptions or fumble returns for a touchdown. So they've just been excellent, and they also get after the passer a ton. I mean, they have 47 sacks during the regular season. That breaks down to about 3 sacks per game, so they can really rush the passer. We know the Texans do like to pass. They did a good job of keeping Brian Hoyer upright this year. Didn't allow a ton of sacks, but they attempted the 9th. They were tied for the 9th most pass attempts with the Colts this year. So that puts you in a position where Hoyer's back there and he's going to face a pass rush. They haven't. Yeah, they rank above average, but they haven't faced the Chiefs every game this year either. So opportunities like that elevate your ceiling, and really that's what you're looking for in GPP is that nice ceiling. But the nice thing is with that low over-under total, you're getting a pretty high floor with this group as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then makes sense that we'd be going right from that to the other side of the same game, and the Texans, best defensive player on the planet. And if you disagree with that, then you're just simply wrong. J.J. Watt, I mean, especially in the second half, has just absolutely dominated. And, I mean, if it weren't for guys like Cam Newton having ridiculous seasons this year, I think J.J. Watt might get my vote because this is not a good team. But J.J. Watt makes this defense a very good defense, and he has the ability to dominate any game in any line of scrimmage as one player, which is just absolutely ridiculous, something that we haven't seen from many players, I mean, in a really long time in the NFL. So J.J. Watt by himself, I mean, we were joking before the show about if DraftKings or FanDuel had added IDPs before the playoffs. I'd just play J.J. Watt because IDP scoring, he's probably going to outscore most position players this week. But either way, it's a Chiefs offense it's a check down type of offense. They're one deep threat. is Jeremy Maclin. He's got Jonathan Joseph on him. Not a good matchup for him. So everything's still kind of pointing to this game being the kind of ugly game that if you want to see offensive output, go ahead and don't bother watching this game. Sleep in.
Yeah, and the funny thing is you mentioned Alex Smith as a game manager, and that's accurate. You look at the scoring per offenses for teams, or the scoring for teams this year, and the Chiefs check in ninth in points per game, 25.3, and you say, maybe that's not an offense that I really want to target with the defense. But you strip away their 6 return touchdowns on defense, and so 36 points, not counting the PATs, that turns into 23 points per game for the offense, which is really just a tick above average. 22.8 points per game was the league average for scoring per team this year. So, again, that's really just average-ish against the defense that features J.J. Watt. That's been above average across the board. Basically, their lowest rank in a notable category is being tied for 12th in turnovers forced. Otherwise, 5th in sacks. Tied for 7th in points allowed per game, tied for 4th in yards allowed per play. I mean, they just check in across the board as a very strong defense. And the thing is, if the Chiefs do end up finding themselves in passing situations, that is bad news for them. Not because Alex Smith is just going to wing the ball around and turn the ball over, but they were tied for the 3rd fewest pass attempts this year with 473. Yet they were also tied for the 6th most sacks allowed with 46. So that's quite the combination there. If you force Alex Smith to drop back more, you're putting that offensive line in a position where they're going to have to block J.J. Watt more, and they struggle to block. Yeah, they struggle to block pass rushers all year, and they didn't pass the ball much as it stands. So obviously, the odds makers have the Chiefs as small favorites, so it's unlikely that game turns into the Chiefs playing catch-up from the beginning, but if it turns out that way, the Texans have an enormous ceiling just because they struggle so mightily to keep Alex Smith upright when he does have to drop back.
Yeah, absolutely. So this one, I don't mind targeting both sides of this one with some defense all the time. So either way, that's going to wrap things up here for us for first round of the playoffs for the defense analysis. Find us on Twitter at DFCafe, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and check out the rest of our content at dailyfantasycafe.com.